In this video, we're going to look at the most popular plugins that producers use on their drum bus, and we're going to compare them against stock plugins, and the results may surprise you. The first plugin we're going to look at is the Orion plugin by Cradle. The second one we're going to look at is Neutron by iZotope. Third, we're going to look at Safari pedals. And lastly, we're going to look at stock FL Studio plugins. So if you want to see which plugins are worth buying, stick around for the video. Now, because I want to see which plugin makes our drums punchy, I specifically used some loops from Native Instruments that have a lot of mid-range information. I also layered it with some 808s and some synths, and this is what our beat sounds like. As you can see, the melody already has a lot of information in the low, mid, and in the high range, so it makes it hard for the drums to really pop in the mix. So let's quickly take a look at the Orion UI. First section we have here after our input is this drive section. So this section allows you to add some distortion, and it has 3 different kinds of distortion, A, B, and C. The plugin is not specific on what kind of distortion it is, but you can toggle between them. You also have a high pass filter that is applied after the processing. So after the drive processing is done, you can add a high pass filter. Next in this section right here is essentially a saturation sort of section along with compression. So you have your harmonics, so you can add some punch to either 80 or 50 hertz, and you can drive the harmonics there. Lift also adds saturation and what they call excitement across the full spectrum of sound. And then you have a compressor with 2 different types of compressions. It doesn't give you the attack, it doesn't give you the ratio, it doesn't give you the release. You just have A and B mode, and you can just drive into the compressor. So I'm not really a fan of that because I don't know what ratio we're using. I don't know what the threshold is. You're sort of just driving into that compression module that they have in the app. Next is a harmonic EQ. So here you can add some color to the harmonics. Here you can boost the sub at 40 hertz, 100 hertz, 1K, 3K, and 10K. So again, it changes the color of the harmonics. And lastly, we have the parallel section, which you can drive some of the sub or low end. So you're adding parallel signal back into the processing for the sub and the low end. Loud increases the perceived loudness. So likely again, some sort of saturation or parallel processing into a clipper or limiter. So you're not increasing the overall volume, but you're just increasing the perceived loudness. And grit is supposed to add texture to the transient. So let's take a look and see how we can use Orion on our drum bus. All right, so this is the final version. As you can see, I don't have the drive enabled. I don't like the distortion it added at all. I have a little bit of the harmonic EQ, not the sub here. I have the loud at 3.1, no grit. I don't like what it does to the transients there, and a little bit of parallel on the lows. I pulled it to -2 dB. So regardless which plugins we'll use, we're going to cap the drum bus at -2 dB. All right, so I'm going to export it, and next, let's take a look at Neutron. All right, now Neutron has a bunch of modules we're going to use. Typically for a drum bus, what I like to use is some compression, some EQ, a transient shaper, and then also you have a clipper in Neutron 5. I don't think I'm going to use all the modules. I will quickly start loading up some of the modules on, and then I will discuss the thought process behind it. All right, so I've made some changes to my drum bus in Neutron. I'm going to quickly discuss what I've done, and then we're going to play it. So first, I added a compressor, and I'm splitting the bands into a low end to push up the kick, as well as a mid to high range. So the mid to high range has a threshold at -14 dB. The low end, I'm allowing a little bit more. Next, I have a mid-side EQ. On the mid, I'm boosting a little bit. I have a low shelf that is in dynamic mode, that is lifting a little bit around 100 and below. I'm also cutting at 10 hertz, which is not really audible in our ears. Subs will be able to pick it up, but that's more of a frequency that you feel more so than what you hear. I'm also doing some dynamic EQing on the mids to pull it back a little bit, and I'm boosting the highs. On the sides, I'm actually cutting everything below 100 at a gradual slope, and I'm boosting the high end. So again, mid-side EQing. After that, we go just into one compressor with a very slow attack, and again, ratio fairly low, 2.1 for every decibel. I'm then going into a clipper. So what a soft clipper does is the transients that go beyond a threshold, it rounds them out. So for my low end, I set a threshold at negative 3.5 dB and I'm boosting 3 decibels into it. And then for my mids and highs, I set a little bit of a lower threshold at negative 9.1 and I'm only boosting 1 decibel into it. Lastly, after we do all of that, I'm doing some transient shaping, again, multi-band. On the low end, I'm using a sharp attack to make the kick more punchy. And then on the mid to highs, I'm using a very smooth attack and also boosting the sustains a bit. And finally, I also have a limiter engaged at negative 2 decibels. So let's play. So I'm going to bounce the track so we can use it at the end to compare. And then next, let's look at Safari pedals. So Safari pedals have a bunch of little small, I would say cost-effective plugins that you can use, or you can use all of them. For this, I picked 3, and the 3 that I picked was Al Control, which is their compressor, Dragon EQ, which is their EQ, and Lion Master. If you also want to add some distortion, you can use their clipper. I personally didn't use it because I can't set the threshold on there. I like a little bit more granular control, but I think the Lion Master does a good enough job that it allows me to set a limit, drive the volume into it, and then I can also add some saturation. So let's quickly talk about what I've done here. So for their compressor, I've used their mix bus option. So each one of these changes the character of the sound. I like their mix bus. You'll see as you flip through them, their attack and release time changes, even if you have the speed set at a certain speed. So for the mix bus, the attack is 241, release is 7. If I go to smooth, the attack is 229, the release is 1. So for me, mix bus sounded the best. For the ratio, is just a 2-to-1 ratio. Again, every 2 decibels that go beyond a threshold, only 1 goes out. As you can see, there is no threshold here. So this is similar to the 1176, which you basically, it has a standard threshold that is set internally and you drive the volume into it. And then you can also control the output. So same thing here. You can see I'm driving 7 decibels into it. And then I'm also increasing on the output 1 decibel. On the Dragon EQ, I boosted a little bit on their low gain, which is likely a low shelf. I rolled some of the mids off because it was sounding a little bit too convoluted, and then increased the high frequency. And you can see here, I'm driving a little bit the low frequency. And on the low frequency, again, that shelf, likely a shelf, is at 91 Hertz. And then I'm just adding some noise to it, some distortion with the drive, but I'm not driving the mids or the highs. And lastly, on the Lion Master, as you can see, I'm increasing it by 2.2 decibels. Low frequency gain, I'm increasing that. Highs as well. And I'm adding a little bit of saturation, 10% saturation, and then set the limit at negative 2 decibels. So with that, let's hear how it sounds. All right, so I'm gonna bounce this as well so we can compare it at the end. And next, let's just use stock FL Studio plugins. All right, so for my stock plugins, here's the sequence. So the first thing in my plugin chain is a multiband compressor. So we have all of the bands active. So the low frequency one is set to 203 Hertz and below. My mids go from 4091, so 491 Hertz, all the way to 7,159. This covers quite a wide range, so it goes right into the high frequencies. And then on the absolute highs, it goes from 7159 upward. The threshold on my low is set to negative 10 dB. Threshold on my mids, again, negative 10 dB, and then also negative 19. And then I'm giving some gain back, 0.3 on the low end, 1 decibel on the mid, and also 0.5 decibels on the high end. Then I go into a parametric EQ, and here I'm only using 3 bands. I'm boosting a little bit. We're using a shelf on the low end, so everything 300 Hertz and below. I'm also using a bell filter to boost a little bit around the 1000 range, and then also at 15,000 for that ear candy. Next, I'm using a transient processor. So I do want the transient to pop through because, again, I found that the drums are getting lost in the mix. So I want them to be very punchy. And if you want them to be punchy, you need to increase that attack so it punches through. As you can see here, I increased the attack by 55%. Release is the same. And I'm also adding some drive, again, that adds distortion. Last in my plugin chain for the stock plugins is the Fruity Limiter. And for this one, I've boosted the gain 5 decibels going into the plugin. plugin into the processing. I've added some saturation on the peaks of the transient. So I've set the saturation to -4 decibels. So everything that is -4 and above, the tips of those transients will get additional harmonic information. I've set the ceiling to -2 decibels, and that's it. I did not engage the compressor. And then this is what it sounds like. All right, so I'm gonna bounce this, and next I'm gonna open up a brand new project with all 4 tracks. We're gonna A, B, C, and D. I'm not gonna put the labels on, so you can write in the comments which ones you like best. All right, so I've pulled up the tracks. I've labeled them A, B, C, and D. Again, I will mention at the end of the video which one's which, but please pick your favorite before you find out. Let your ears listen rather than your eyes, because I know we have our favorite plugins. But let's start with A and then go downward and see which one you like best. Now time for the reveal. So A was the stock plugins, B was Safari pedals, C was Orion, and D was Neutron 5. And if I can pick which one my favorites were, I would say it was a tie between Neutron and Safari pedals. Neutron still felt a little bit cleaner and more punchy. I felt like the transient shaper inside of Neutron is phenomenal. I use that on almost every track. It really helps the drums punch out a little bit more than Safari pedals. I'd say that A was a close contender, which is the stock plugins. And last was Orion. I feel like Orion added too much distortion. It was too muddy still. It didn't punch through the mix. And I don't say this as a hater, because I have God Particle and I love it. I think Jason Joshua is a phenomenal producer, mixing engineer. But I will be honest with you, I really didn't like what I did. And I tried different genres, because for this video I was preparing, I didn't know what genre to use, and it always came out last. I felt like I could get a better sound with stock plugins than Orion, if I'm fully transparent. With that being said, let me know your thoughts. Let me know if this helped you out. And as always, I hope this inspired you to go and make some music. Peace.